Welcome to this panel discussion where we will talk about the future challenges and opportunities for collaboration around open source from the perspective of cloud service providers. I'm Cristina Pauna, the program manager for open source community at GaiaX, and I will be your moderator for this session, where we will look at this topic both from a technical and a policy point of view. So let's start with a bit of round of introduction from our guest today, just in the order you see here in the pictures, but I will stay at the end. So, Rafael.
Yeah, hi everyone, I'm Rafael Daniel. I'm working at OVH Cloud. I'm doing EU public policy.
Thanks. Sarah?
My name is Sara. I work for Access. We are a Spanish cloud provider, and I work in the R&D department, leading a team of technical people piloting new solutions.
Thanks. Enzo?
Hi, thanks. So I'm Enzo Ribagnac. I work for Huawei Technologies. I work in public policy, mainly on cloud and data policies.
And Maria?
Hi, I'm Maria Barros Weiss. I'm leading a team Digital Ecosystem Solutions division in IONOS. IONOS is an international cloud provider, European cloud provider. And in the digital ecosystems, we work with the partnerships at research, development, and innovation level.
As for myself, as I've mentioned earlier, I am the go-to person in GaiaX on open source related matters. Just to say a couple of words of GaiaX, it's a nonprofit association with the goal to establish ecosystems of data federations where data is made available in a trustworthy environment. And of course, these data federations rely on cloud infrastructure to run. So when we're looking at the digital world, and trust in the digital world, we're looking at the whole stack. So thank you all for being here with me to tackle some of the challenging questions around open source and cloud providers. Going into the topics of today and trying to tie it up a little bit with all the data that is being generated today. I think it is generally agreed that there is a lot of potential for an economy based on extensive data usage. So what do you think is the role of cloud providers in the data economy, and what are the main challenges that you see today in Europe, given the current structure of the cloud market? Whomever wants to start, just free.
Okay, I can start then. Thank you, Cristina. So I think cloud providers play a crucial role in the data economy, right? And they need to be seen as both enablers and facilitators. So by offering infrastructure, platforms, the service necessary to deal with data and to deal with data spaces, which allow to work with data in a decentralized way, in a collaborative way. So here, cloud is an enabler and also a facilitator of this data economy.
I like this dual factor of it. And challenges, can you think of, I don't know, the biggest challenges that you see from where you are?
So in the European...
Yeah.
So just to finish then, because indeed I forgot to address the challenges in the European cloud market. There are different challenges, but Europe is very focused in data sovereignty, which is very important for us. Of course, privacy as well, and also the vendor lock-in, right? Via collaboration, we can also work in giving more flexibility to the data economy.
Okay, thanks. Anyone else who wants to add something on the roles and challenges?
No, but it's very similar. If I may continue, for us, I mean, we launched our cloud services in Europe, I think 8 months ago. So we're quite a small cloud providers in Europe, right? And I'd say the main challenges are very similar to what was said before, in a sense that the first one that comes to my mind is sort of the lack of interoperability that creates this sort of locking effect for customers, among other things that create locking effects, right? And the second one maybe is skills shortage, in a sense that, since we launched so recently, we try to develop, recruit, etc., and then just trying to find the right labor force is the first challenge, and then you have other challenges that were raised before, like competition issues, etc., etc., which are supposed to be addressed, at least as I work in policy. On my side, supposed to be addressed from a regulatory angle with different policies. Competition-wise, is supposed to be the DMA. Technically wise, it's supposed to be the Data Act as well. So all these sort of challenges are making it a bit more difficult to sort of exist on the cloud market. But other than that, it will be our role to sort of contribute to digitalization, as in like being an enabler, as Maria said just before, helping different companies to be able to digitalize as quickly as possible. And therefore, when it comes to open source, being flexible and being open is sort of the element that is supporting of that.
Yeah, and since you mentioned policies, maybe we can. Sorry. Sorry. Maybe Raphael, you can add something to that, because I know that's also your domain.
I think, I think I would say for sure we can all agree. We may be competitors also in some way, but it seems that we all share the same values. It's definitely important. I think I would say theoretically having an economy based on extensive data usage is great, but concretely, if it's only welcome if it's duly supported in terms of competition, data control, and sustainability, because it's part of the challenges. And the fact is that cloud providers have a central role to play based also on the three different layers of the cloud. And if I'm not right to be, let's say, critic, but does the current structure of the European cloud market allows this duly support and control? Not sufficiently, definitely, and will be allowing in the near future, yes, if the currently defined regulation would say at European level holds its promises. And Enzo mentioned some of them with DMA and data access, also on sovereignty, as we said also beforehand, the way how we can protect critical infrastructure and define a future cybersecurity scheme or sustainability. All these kind of steps are very important. I think we have to think on a global stage, and what is important and probably the main challenges for everyone is that the cloud can't work in silo, and yes, the user must be aware of the value of its data. The provider, you must allow the user to decide by providing interoperable solutions, reversible solutions, and also services that fulfill regulatory framework. And that's the last part of the triangle. Let's say the lawmakers must also create a condition to allow these healthy relations, I would say, between users and providers, and by stopping barriers and setting clear regulation. And that being said, and we just finished by said that just comment by listening to what has been said, we can. I think it's a famous tire manufacturer who had a slogan. We can paraphrase it maybe and say that there is nothing without control, basically. And that's I would say that's really my 2 cents on this.
Thanks. And Sarah, do you want to add anything to the role and the challenges from where you sit?
Well, on top of what the rest of the colleagues said, I think we have a very important role in taking our customers in their way to the digitalization and to benefit from the data economy. Like they trust on us with their data, they trust on our services, and they trust that we are complying with all the regulations, right? So I think we also have a role in teaching them what is behind. It's not that it's like just to set up a server and you forget about what is in there, right? You have responsibility as a cloud provider, but you also have to teach your customers there are things that you cannot do, or how you have your data is like you have a cloud server, you put data there, and the magic of the data economy happens. No, there's a path you have to walk together with your customer, and I think that's something like EU cloud providers can do better than other providers, because we know the regulation, we are here, and we are smaller in size, which is sometimes like a disadvantage, but it provides us like the capability to be closer to the customer and to walk together the path of getting into those new challenges also for businesses. So I think it's
Yeah,
an opportunity for us.
and I think to what you said, as a cloud provider serving multiple customers, you also have the know-how in between that can help customers with, let's say, best practices or issues that you already seen in other places that you can use to help other customers in that sense when it comes to teach, guide, along
Mhm.
those lines.
Especially
Just to
when
add,
those, yeah, sorry, go ahead.
no, Sarah, go ahead.
Yeah, those issues of data sovereignty or there's something we know as cloud providers because we need to know, right? It's something we also have to translate to customers. It's not the same that you have data here or data there. You share data with this economic agent and with another one. So you have to be aware of who you trade with, who you exchange data with, because it comes with consequences. And that's something we know as cloud providers because we have to comply with all the regulations, but it's something we also have to tell customers so they are aware.
Yeah, just to add that the joint research development, so collaboration among cloud providers, is also crucial to address these strategic challenges in Europe that the colleagues mentioned.
Okay. So I would now move to tying in with the next questions that we have. But before that, just a kind reminder to our listeners that they can put questions in the live chat. I see a comment, but it doesn't look like a question. So I would just move to the next one. And looking at the challenges that we just discussed, one way to address some of them is through collaboration. And I wanted to ask you how you see the expectations put on you as cloud providers to collaborate around strategic topics for Europe, such as data protection that Sarah just mentioned, cybersecurity, and cloud infrastructure sustainability. Again, a random order, whomever wants to start. So Sarah, maybe you want to go just because it's tied with the data we just discussed.
I don't know if there are any expectations on us from customers. I think what customers want is just like to have easy services, like we were talking about interoperability that relates also to portability of service. I contract a service with the provider, and the same as with roaming, I can go to anywhere in Europe and make calls from my phone, and there's no issues, and I can text anybody as if I was at home, and I can change providers with almost no friction. I think customers expect sort of the same thing with cloud providers, right? And this is not what is at the moment. So in terms of expectations, I think it's like something
More of
that
an
is taken for
implicit one.
granted. Yeah, it's just like I don't know if like customers are aware of that. Like when they contract the service, I don't know if they are aware that when if they want to migrate their services to another provider, it's not going to be like you call your service provider like, hey, I want to go to this other provider, and it happens from one day to the next, right? So I think in that regards there are like assumptions more than expectations, so there might be like surprises for some people, but I guess so we have to work in comply with those expectations or assumptions for clients, and probably that comes with some sort of open source development, joint development, as Maria was saying. uh, Joint research and development programs help us to like come together and do common things that then we all can use and third parties also can use and adopt.
Yes.
Okay, so what I get from you is that it's more of an implicit expectation, not so much put on by clients, but maybe from other institutions, like, for example, on the cybersecurity and the policies that were mentioned earlier by Enzo's. Do you think, and maybe, let's say, the regulators expect companies and cloud providers to collaborate?
Yeah, definitely. I think, I mean, you mentioned data protection and cybersecurity, right? I think,
Yeah.
I mean, on you definitely need industry collaboration on this, at least setting up standards or something like this in order to be sure that you have something that is homogeneous throughout the market, but also that facilitate the adoption, right? So if you talk about data protection, for example, I mean, we already have regulations on this, obviously. And you have also industry initiatives, code of conducts, different type of standards that were built by the industry together with the regulators, data protection authorities at the European level or at the national level, actually. And it's only because you brought different players together and cloud players together that you managed to get this sort of code of conducts or standards together. And this definitely facilitates the compliance model, and that helps a lot to create something. That's the first. Now, concerning the sustainability infrastructure, it's a bit more tricky, but I would say, I mean, definitely standards, it's not going to be enough there, but I actually, on top of sustainability, I would even add energy consumption in general. I think maybe for this there would be room even for open source projects themselves, and players get together the same way that Sarah mentioned for interoperability, that you would have for energy consumption or sustainability targets. You'd have players getting together in order to reach a common goal, either it's set up by the industry itself, or goals that would be set up by the different institution or the different regulators. We have this currently at the national level, that is at the European level, that is being discussed. That'd be interesting. But if we have to discuss sustainability and energy consumption, I'd say in the conversation, even if it's energy consumption and sustainability of cloud infrastructures or just cloud services in general, I'd say I want more than just cloud players, right? You have energy companies that could be involved in this, for instance, right? You have energy companies that have, if the traditional large energy companies in Europe, they have enormous IT departments. They have the know-how concerning cloud services somehow. They would be involved. I think it would be beneficial for everyone, for them to be involved within this discussion and try to explore solutions together, open source solutions together, and the same way that Europe is getting together sometimes to solve issues. Here you would have the industry from different players and from different countries, from different industry, getting together and trying to solve a common issue with an open source a solution. I think this would be beneficial. Maybe an angle for regulators here to come would be for the regulators to maybe create this area for us to discuss, if we have to discuss standards before discussing open source, so if we have to, a specific angle or a specific target, that would also be helpful. So this sort of, public-private sort of partnerships, but also cross-industry partnerships, I think that would be, I mean, if we really talking about collaborating and reaching such ambitious goals, that would definitely be needed.
Yeah, so what I take from what you say is that we need to look at it not just from the perspective of the cloud providers, but from end to end on how these how the cloud is used, and you have to look beyond just that, let's say, layer in the stack. And yes, I can say from where I sit, which is an association which is member driven, I do have expectations for collaborations for everybody who joins, regardless of the let's say the layer in the stack or in the industry that they work on.
In the end, because important here is the trust, right? In these digital ecosystems is the trust, and for the trust we need transparency, and we also need accountability. And I think for, as it was here mentioned, and for the cybersecurity, data sharing, sustainability, energy efficiency, so trust is very important, and with collaboration we can also create this trust, this transparency, this accountability, and for sure the role of cloud providers is very important on this.
Yeah, no. But it's like Enzo said, it's also shared. What about you, Rafael?
Yeah, was I think what just saying trust was able to say the same. Trust and transparency a key, and also what Enzo said very correctly. It's a question on the collaboration. If it goes on what is the context of the collaboration? Basically, are we based on a specific legislation or standards, or more in a self-regulatory modus? So it's where potentially you anticipate a future legislation or its application. It's only possible if beforehand you share the same vision, same value, and same understanding. And it's not easy looking at few examples like IPSI or Gaia-X or European Industrial Alliance for Edge and Cloud, where you have different players, different size, a different universe, basically, who are working together. They decide to work together, or they are, let's say, invited to. And the question, what will be the results of this? And it's very important to see what will be the let's say the background or the roots of this collaboration. You can't work with everyone. You can work with competitors at the moment where you ask for instance for the same level playing field. I mean it's a free market. And also important is to have in mind, I would say, the interplay with public decision makers. So I believe we need regulation, in particular when it comes to protect users' data and to guarantee users' freedom of choice. That has been said in the beginning. And I think at the end, with this collaboration process, we need a vision. What will be the cloud market maybe in 2, 5, or 10 years? I mean, Gaia-X, it's only 3 years old. IPSI, it's very recent and so on. So we're just at the beginning. And also the legislation that Enzo mentioned before, that's so new, not even finalized for some of them. So it's a work in progress mode, and it will be very interesting to see how even also the users' needs will evolve at the same time in parallel. Let's say with the regulation, we always have to adapt as a cloud provider, thinking on the regulation side and the users' needs, and to be like in the middle of this, the link, I would say, between both. So it's let's say fascinating time, momentum for one of us, but collaboration is definitely one of the key layers to achieve this, I would say.
Okay, I agree. And I think it's a nice transition to our next question, because trust was mentioned quite a bit. And then, of course, in Gaia-X, trust is a big topic. So I'm curious, from your perspective, how do you see the open source technologies and the ongoing regulation changes at the EU level contributing towards this building of trust when it comes to public cloud in European organizations?
So then, if I can go first. So
Absolutely.
yes, indeed, it is very well aligned with the previous. So open source, it's very important for vendor independency and for flexibility, right? And also, like we were saying before, collaborative developments, collaborative spaces is very important for sovereignty, for security, and also for community-driven innovations. And here, open source for sure can play a significant role in building the trust in the public cloud among organizations, and also in giving the flexibility for organizations to work also with among cloud providers, right? So vendor independency and flexibility, in fact, open source can be crucial here.
And when you say flexibility, you're thinking of having different, like freedom of choice, different stacks from where you can choose, or you had something else in mind?
Flexibility regarding not having vendor lock-in, regarding allowing collaborative developments and community-driven innovations as well.
Okay. Enzo, you wanted to add something to that?
I just completely agree. It's interesting because when you mentioned trust before, that's also one of the elements I was thinking of. I was thinking of 3 things. I was thinking, because when you say trust, I put myself in the position of the user when we talk about trust, right? End user or business user, whatever. And I see at least 3 elements here to discuss trust. Trust that, you know, the business model is not going to lock you in, right? So that you trust that by adopting a certain technology, you know that you would still be flexible, and then in 5 years, 2 years, you won't be stuck into a model that doesn't suit you anymore. And that's sort of the locking issue. You need to be able to trust the business that you're getting in. Then you have the sort of trust at the technological level, meaning trust that it will function, trust that you will be able to manage it, trust that it will not be dysfunctional. And then you have the other layer of trust that would be trust concerning data protection, security that we mentioned before. For the latest one, I'd say you already have legislations for this. You have NIS2, you have the CRA. All of this, they're working toward the direction of building trust. Obviously, we can argue concerning specific legislations. For example, we talk about open source now. Obviously, there are a lot of discussions concerning open source and the Cyber Resilience Act at the moment, a lot of issues concerning terminologies and who should be responsible, etc. But at least we know that the topic is taken care of, meaning that the trust on that level will improve, and then therefore the adoption of public cloud. Then for the others, you have, I'd say, maybe more challenges, but there's room for collaboration in order to build that flexibility. You mentioned before the role of Gaia X in there in order to create this sort of flexibility or interoperability. You have other initiatives as well in the industry. If we talk open source, I'm thinking the initiative called Open Services Cloud as well, that is here to create this sort of interoperability layer. In Huawei, we're trying to do it as well through something that is called Expense, where we sort of create this interoperability layer that allows everyone through open APIs and open source models to come and integrate their specific cloud service into our stack so that it's easy, and then there is no issue for that at the technical level, but also at the business level, as I mentioned before. So, you know, the dysfunctionment for lock-in and dysfunctionment at the technological level. And that's part of the game we have to play. Sarah mentioned before there is a level of education as well that we have here. We're here also to educate our players of the challenges on the market before they adopt the technologies. That's definitely part of the game that we're playing here. I think the European customers and the European market in general is getting more and more mature on that aspect, meaning that even the customers now, they sort of know that they want to go for, sometimes they want to go for a player that is flexible enough because they have this know-how already internally. It's getting there. The market is obviously not that mature yet, but that's how I see it, at least for the collaboration, but also the trust built into public cloud so that the market can grow in that direction.
So do you see it more like consuming open source into the cloud stack is what can give customers trust, or is it contributing to open source, or both? I can challenge you a bit.
Both. I don't know if the question is for me, but I'd say both.
Yeah.
I mean, there is a recent report that was published, I think, by an institute, economic institute, and maybe an open source foundation as well, where they mentioned the fact that building open source interoperability would help to decrease the costs, therefore making it easier for customer to adopt that technology, because the cost is one of the main element, right? And then they would also add sort of, I think they're talking about 15% growth on top of the current growth of the market that is expected. And that out of this 15% growth, thanks to this open source interoperability model, most of it will go to smaller providers. So right now, if you look at the growth of the cloud market and, the famous different graphs that we've seen concerning the cloud market, the growth is always going to the same players, right? But with this, the sort of open source interoperability layer on top of it, then this 50% additional growth go basically only to the smaller players. And there is a reason for that. So, obviously they're going to be winners out of this strategy, but that's, if we have to set up regulatory targets and we want to support smaller players, that should be the one.
Yeah, and I would say that open source, besides, a certain level of transparency that comes or brings trust to it, also facilitates the interoperability that you mentioned, because you're working on something that is public, so you don't need to do the same work to be interoperable, or multiple players can do the work together to create interoperability. Interoperability doesn't have to be done from just one side. Yeah. What about you, Sarah? What do you think?
I don't think I have much to add to it. Like I agree with all what Enzo said. Like interoperability is crucial for us to survive as providers, I would say, because if you talk to people out there, which cloud providers do you know, or that can come to the top of your mind in like 10 seconds? It's like there are 3, maybe 4 that come to everybody's minds, and those players are kind of setting up standards now. So what they do is so adopted that it becomes a de facto standard. So what we need to do is like push for our own standard if we want to not be behind, right? It's like people, there are leaders and there are followers, and where we want to be, right? We want to be leaders or followers. We can just like go together in like when the Tour de France is coming soon. So what those people do is like they go together on a team, right, to support what they get with a strategy, with a common like group strategy. And I mean, the standards are gonna be set either like collectively by agreement or by someone that makes a thing that becomes a standard because it's so widely adopted that nobody's going to go against it because it makes no sense. And same with like interoperability comes together with that, right? If we all set that standard and we agree to comply to that standard, interoperability just is just like is there.
Yeah. Market adoption, yes. It can create support to the market adoption, which is very important for the adoption of different technologies.
Yeah, and I think it's also a little bit easier to, because like education and teaching was mentioned earlier, when you have open source components, it's easier to disseminate information about them and to get people to use them, and they can learn it themselves. You don't necessarily have to go through some process to, let's say, teach your customers about how to use certain technology if it's already open source and it's already available to be used. And then you can, if I can add another layer to the trust and the relation to open source, you have a certain level of predictability with it, especially in, let's say, more mature or towards more mature projects where you have a certain release cadence, where you know what to expect. All the features are public. If something happens and that's no longer available in the next release, again, you see it. So that also creates a level of trust in terms of the predictability of the software that you're taking into consideration. So maybe just one of you.
Plus it's more open and people can participate and be part of it, and like also feel ownership, or a belonging or some sort of ownership to those projects because they can actually contribute to it, like make suggestions or improvements. Or so there's like it's not just like a thing of the providers, but it becomes a community. That's where the word community comes in, right? Like you build an open source community with everybody contributes and everybody is taken into consideration. It's not like I sell this, you buy it because there are no other options. It's like no, I buy it, but I also want this and this and that. And if you ask that to one provider, then you'll have to ask to the other and the other and the other. Whereas if there is a community, you ask to the community, and if everybody agrees on that, then it goes, and it
Or
makes
you
sense.
just do it.
or or you know what's going to happen to it. But imagine, like, if you're a single customer and want something, it's very unlikely that this is going to go through. Whereas if there is also a community of users and adopters, probably your issue is going to be somebody else's issue. So you can really make a difference from the user perspective, not just adopt and use and pay, but also build and contribute and be part of it.
Influence. Yep.
Also important for the compliance, right, with the regulatory challenges, with the data protection, with sovereignty.
I will maybe also agree. I'm not a technical expert, definitely not, but we said open source is not limited to coding exactly what we mentioned. It's much more the way of how users decide to which platform he wants to use, and what are its expectations. So it is basically he controls back the power, and that's probably the most fantastic thing with open source. And it's and that's why, and I do believe in I think it's, and so you mentioned it, it's a business driver, open source, because it sounds weird, because if it's open, basically where can you grow in terms of businesses globally? But I believe it's exactly because you can have what we are supporting over cloud, open source cloud platforms, where basically you're enabling any type of cloud services. You allow interoperability, reusability, transparency, hybrid solutions, no lock-in solutions. Then you pick and choose, and if you have the right partners, you can use them, because we are doing YAS and PaaS, but not SaaS, for instance. But you can have some partners who provide solutions, and so everyone it's a win-win solutions, and that's probably the most interesting thing. But I think that probably we have in mind, it's I think the question is how we can scale up open source solutions, for instance, for public organizations. And it's a question of skills, of knowledge, changing habits. It's not easy. I mean, even a private organization, definitely. But as we see with regulation, as Maria just mentioned, we see, for instance, in France, there's like a trend to have more guarantee to use open source solutions. But what does it mean, and how can you make sure that at each level, even in the locality, in a city, at the closest, the smallest level, you ensure that the administration will use open source solutions? I mean, it's not easy to have this. You just have to it's a bottom up, a top down exchange, and it's not. This is probably one of the main challenges that we have to address, and probably open source can accompany these regulatory changes, but we have to see probably the part of standards, as we see with the Data Act on the interoperability part. Maybe it's something that we will see. There's some standards on open source, let's say in brackets, but it's a living, let's say, element, and it's interesting to see that can possibly, in theory, fulfill all the needs and on what we said since 37 minutes now. Everything can be encompassed into open source solutions. So that's good stuff.
Yep, thanks for that. And just to leave some room for questions from the public, if we have any. One more. To move to the last topic of today, how critical it is to get hyperscalers involved in the development of these new open source technology. So, for example, when we think of the needs of managing edge cloud continuum, which is now emerging, what do you think of the involvement of hyperscalers should be here?
Yeah, again, we go, so it's again important, it's the market adoption, right? Because the hyperscalers still dominate the market. And for market adoption, for mainly when we are talking about the cloud to edge continuum, because then we talk about the different levels of different technologies, decentralization. So market adoption is very important for the technologies to have an impact, and scalability as well, because the hyperscalers involvement will for sure influence the scalability of the solutions. And support, because only with everyone's adoption we can have leverage these infrastructures, and we can leverage on these technologies as well, right? It is important to create best practices. It is important also for the compatibilities, for the compliances.
Okay.
I think maybe just to add what Maria said, the question is also, why should we switch to open source? Is it because of financial questions? Is it because of more sovereignty? Because you want to have flexibility and so on? And probably if you start with this, and you can create your needs and then see which provider can fulfill these solutions. And obviously there's no one single one. So that's the point with open source, and it's definitely something critical. And we see that some hyperscalers or some players, maybe their solutions became standards because they were the first one to address the market, or they developed something, but there's not standards defined collectively and to everyone. So the question is how to rethink, let's say, what have become standards on the market. You mentioned market adoption, Maria, and what could be, let's say, all the standards that could be regulated and be accessible to everyone, and to rethink or rebalance sometimes the needs and matching also the demands by thinking also with the different regulatory needs that has to be welcomed.
Becoming standards de facto, right? Standards de facto, and also allowing the interoperability among all the providers, and in the cloud to edge continue as well.
Okay, so if I'm to challenge you a little bit, because the question is like, do you see them as like, do you see hyperscalers as a must to be involved in the creation of these, let's say, de facto standards, or maybe not? I'm poking a bit.
Well, for the ecosystems development and innovation, it is important to have all the players, right? Because only then we can really build on data spaces, on data economy, and on creating digital ecosystems.
Okay, so you do see a role for that. Yeah, go ahead.
No, but the thing is, I don't think there is an absolute answer to this. I think it's also related to, it's relative in a sense that it's related to the situation of the market. So obviously in a market that is highly concentrated, if you don't have the players that represent, even if they would represent only 30%, then that would be a failure, because you would only do that for 70% of the market. And in Europe, in that case, the market is even more concentrated, because we're talking about more than 70-80% of the market. So in a way, you know, at the beginning, I mentioned the two challenges that smaller cloud providers like we are is facing, as in like lack of interoperability and a skill shortage. If we have a skill shortage, just building the open source without the larger competitors and the larger companies with the larger number of developers, etc., is going to be a challenge. Now, if you talk about interoperability, which I think is more what Maya was going with, then you're going to be interoperable with a very small part of the market. And then therefore the lock-in is still going to remain, because then you will have the larger part of the market that will not be accessible to you. So, you know, we often talk about the lock-in effect, but I think there is also a lockout effect, in a sense that if those players are not in, then they sort of lock you out of the larger part of the market. So, and then that comes back to what Raphael was saying before. Do we want to go for, because you say, is it important to get them in the project? The problem is, do we want this to be happening because we think the market is going to make it happen, or do we want the regulators to push them to join such initiative, in a sense that then we won't be into a self-regulatory model that Raphael mentioned before, but more in something that is imposed by the regulators, which is also something that Raphael mentioned before, in a sense that now we will be sure that the flexibility that we all have been talking about before, and the interoperability that we have been talking about before, will be ensured. Now it's a choice for regulators to make. I mean, as I said before, we could all get in the room and do it together, but if we don't get 70%, 80% of the market, then we all lock out. So at the end, it's more about this than anything else. Now, coming back to the fact that it's not absolute, if we had a market that would be more spread, more fair, more contestable, then no, we don't need specific players in there, because they will just come in, because at the end we will have enough sort of strengths to carry the project together. But at the moment, it's very important to get them in somehow, whether they decide by themselves or it's imposed.
Well, if we're talking about open source, it's still voluntary, and I think some dramatic shifts will have to happen before it stops being voluntary. Just checking a bit the time. Sarah, do you want to add anything to that?
There was this question, is the elephant in the room nobody wants to see, right?
Well, we do have some questions in the chat as well, if you want to skip it.
I mean, my opinion is that if we want like an interoperable and global market, we need to have them. Well, first, do they have incentives to be in? At the moment, I don't think so. But
Okay.
like they have definitely they have infrastructure, they have knowledge, and they have know-how
Resources.
and resources, right? So
Yeah.
and we will be missing a large part of the market, as Enzo explained. So we cannot afford not having them. But on the other side, it's like, yeah, but you're talking about your like strongest competition. So do you want them to be, like, up to which point you want them to be involved in your projects? I mean, because there is the risk of you like getting this tiny like within the project because they are big. So I mean, it's not an easy an easy question.
Okay.
Definitely.
Rafael, your thoughts?
But yeah, maybe just to add, totally agree. And it's basically the question: what will be the you mentioned the incentive? That's a key point, and probably it's also it could become if users or let's say customers are asking for this, because normally every private company is listening on what the users or potential users wants, and it's a question of if there's all this education. So it's a mid-term, long-term project basically, because if you think of now to have this large open source adoptions, maybe it will become a broad one only in a couple of years, 5 years, and so on. When you see the regulation currently, even if it's adopted today, it will enter an application in 3-4 years. What does it mean in a tech universe? 3-4 years, it's a kind of decade in the past industry. So it's very tricky. And what will be in the meantime? What will be the consequences? Will the market continue to grow and be captured by the same hyperscalers, or will it be like dispatch? And that's don't have a crystal ball on definitely, but it's something that we have to address. And at the moment, I do believe at the moment where we see the advantage to open source, then you will force, let's say, the providers to have this solution to fulfill the requirement and then to change their habits. And probably that's maybe I'm an optimistic person, but it's something that we have to think like this. Sometimes regulation helps. Sometimes it's a market, self-regulatory. Sometimes it's own initiative. But even in probably, I don't know if big companies or corporate are moving to this. Maybe it will have also an attractive effect for everyone, or maybe it could start with smaller players. So it's something that we have to see. But I think it's a big wave, and there's no reason why open source will see its wave to be reduced. I think it will be more and more bigger, and probably the market has to and the provider has to adapt to match this move.
We have a comment in the chat related on this question about the incentive for participating in these projects. And the question is, would Simple or IPSAI would be a right incentive?
Yeah, so I think, in fact, yes, as also with the question about creating an interoperable federated cloud provider in Europe, right? So indeed, Simple and IPSAI and other initiatives, inclusive GaiaX, are all contributing to this, that we can in Europe, in a federated way, create a cloud, so provide cloud in an interoperable way and federated way, of course with GaiaX to help us deal with data spaces challenges as well. And IPSAI CIS, so International Partnership of Common Interest for Europe for Cloud Infrastructure and Services, is exactly trying to create this infrastructure and from the cloud to edge, so in all the cloud continuum. Simple then comes as to create a middleware that allow us to offer this infrastructure in an interoperable and decentralized way. Of course, GaiaX again coming on the data spaces layer, allowing to have services that allow us to address decentralized environments, respecting sovereignty, respecting ownership, and also creating sustainability. So I think all these initiatives address exactly what was the question from the chat, right? That is how to create a federated cloud in Europe.
Yeah. So just to read out the question,
sorry, Christine, I thought that you mentioned it because you mentioned it. So yes.
Yeah. So the simple question I thought is more for the incentive regarding joining open source projects by hyperscalers, but we kind of mashed it together. It's fine. But just to read
it
this
is
question,
related, right? Because these are initiatives that will develop. The outcome will be all in open source. So
yes, exactly. So just to make it right for the person who asked the question, would be cool to set up some sort of European federated public cloud provider where cloud providers can provide the underlying capacity. So do you see that happening? Creating a public cloud provider mashed by multiple cloud providers, if I understand the question right?
just to mention that in Europe, it's even so. In Europe, monopolies are not possible, right? So federated infrastructures is really our way of addressing the European context, where monopolies are not even possible to exist.
So yeah, I think
the scale,
a desire for that or a wish for that from multiple sources. Go ahead, Rafael.
Yeah, it's also a question. I mean, it's nothing new, but we always have in mind that European Union were like 27 member states, so with 500 million customers and different ways of thinking and so on. And so it's difficult for us to have this in mind, and probably the idea of federated services is something that match the best this variety of perceptions. But then and with IPSI, what mentioned Maria perfectly, it's the idea is also to address market failure in strategic value chains, and hydrogen even have very basic or old industrial fields, not only technology or cloud and so on. So that's interesting way how Europe is trying to let's say to not to rethink the past, but like to build the future, let's say. And another element could be interesting also is to see maybe in somehow is what happens with the CHIPS Act and the idea, for instance, the reindustrialization process. And interesting to see that European is ready to saying to industry, let's come back for chips and so on. And who are the players who are doing that? It's not the European for now. It's US players, maybe other from Asia. And it's how to say, okay, bring the technology back or bring it to Europe with European values and so on. How to address the market, where do it serve? And it's interesting to see this move is not only on the pure, let's say, technology layers, also on this really like industrial part. And it's very interesting to see this very concrete interplay, the infrastructures that you mentioned, that we mentioned during all the discussion. It's coming there, and it's much a question of sovereignty when you have foreign non-European players with incentives to come and to work with European companies or so on. So it's very, very diverse. And I don't know honestly how it is in other regions in the world, if the US is doing the same with European players and so on. But it's interesting to see this. It's not an idea to exclude non-European players. The idea is how to push or support European players to be as competitive as the other one. And at the end, it's a users who will decide. But at least have this living playing field on the ground.
Thanks. So just looking at the time, sorry, as though we only have 1 minute, and I want to read the other question from the chat, and maybe we can give a short answer. What are the main challenges you see in establishing collaborative tech projects between private companies and research organizations in Europe? And maybe I can take this one because I have some experience there in my role in GaiaX, where we have members from different places. I would say, as you might expect, research thinks more or focuses more on either theoretical things or limited in scope. And they don't necessarily have this end-to-end where you actually take a demo and put it into production. And they have the idea to how to create it, but they don't necessarily, not always, but in, let's say, enough cases, they don't necessarily create something that is beyond demo. And to take it from a demo quality or a demo level to something that companies can use and produce, it's a little bit a long way. And I think that is one of the biggest challenges, to kind of make both parties think the way the other one thinks. So from a company, have the perspective of research where you're maybe kind of thinking far ahead, and from the research to think of, okay, I'm doing this, but the purpose is not just to end with research, but move forward than that. That would be just my 2 cents on what I see. Now, I know we're strict with the time, so thank you very much all for joining. I know we could continue this for longer. I appreciate you having the conversations with me, and we'll see each other soon again, I'm sure of it.
Thank you, Christina. And
Thanks for the invitation.
Thanks.
Thank you,
Thanks, everyone.
as well.
Bye-bye, everyone.
Bye-bye.
Take care. Bye.
Bye.
Okay.